Hello, hello. Welcome back to The Right Stuff with Crystyn Wright Diaz and American Legacy Network. Thank you guys so much for joining us. If you don't have the American Legacy app, go and get it. There's programming with Black movies, Black chefs, Black producers, Black everything. So if that's your thing, and it should be, go ahead and get that app. It's only $3.99 a month. But today is not just about the app. It's also about our guest who does something that is perfect for American Legacy. I was talking to him right before we got on. I was like, you are like American Legacy. I'm surprised you're not one of the archivers. I have an archive. No, you can't have it, Rodney. All right, so I'm going to read a little bit about Mr. Edelin, and we'll get right into it. So Joseph Edelin, MED, is a professional public speaker and an established educator with more than 18 years of combined experience as a public school teacher, assistant principal, and educational consultant. The majority of Mr. Edelin's career has been spent educating thousands of K-12 students in urban communities throughout the United States. I'd love to know those places once we get into it. To widen his impact, he has also designed in urban communities. He's also designed curriculum, coached teachers, and led workshops around culturally relevant and responsive pedagogy. Mr. Edelin is also the author of Through Our Own Eyes. I'll be talking about it.
There it is.
A Journey into African American History, a workbook designed to help parents and educators teach their children about African American history. Believing that education is the key to liberation and a better life, Mr. Edelin has dedicated his career to ensuring that Black and Brown students are given the tools they need to secure their own freedom through instruction that allows them to be themselves, know their history, and understand the future in their education. All right, that was a little rough, but y'all got it.
Oh, good.
So, welcome, Joseph. Welcome.
Thank you for having us.
We are happy to have you here. So before we even get into like who you are and where you're from, I'm really into background. So can you tell us about what's behind you right now?
Right. This is my wall of mass, as you can see. So I'm in my office right now, in my study, and when I'm doing my work, when I'm teaching kids, I feel like I have to be surrounded, by the culture, by our culture, by our history. It just gives me the good vibes. And so I have all these different masks that I've gotten from different places I've been on the continent, different African shops here in Atlanta, which is where I am currently. Just to, create that vibe, when I'm doing the work for the people, I got to be surrounded by my ancestors,
He said, create that vibe. I like that. All right. And where are they from? You said something on the continent.
I have a bunch. So let's see. This one, I think might be from Nigeria right here. This one, my father gave me a long time ago. So I actually don't know where that one is, the big one in the middle. I don't know where that's from, but when he went to the continent, he got that. A couple of these might be from Ghana. That one is from Benin up there. I don't know if you can see it. No, you can't really see it. They're from all over. I try to, get as much as I can from as many places as I can when I travel.
Thank you for sharing. We had Ashley on the last time from Jelani Girls, and she talked about things that she likes to collect when she travels throughout the continent. So I figured I'd ask.
Absolutely.
So Joseph, tell us about Joseph. Like, we know who you are now, okay, but who were you before, and what created the Joseph that decided to create this awesome book for families and parents and kids?
That's a big question.
I know.
Let me think about that. So I'm in Atlanta right now, but I'm not from here, even though I've been here for the past almost 20 years. I'm born and raised in a town right inside the city of Boston called Brookline. If you're familiar with Massachusetts, Brookline is, where the Kennedys are from, and, for all my old school heads, New Kids on the Block, that's where New Kids on the Block is from. So it's a town within a town, mostly white, fairly, affluent, and that's where I grew up. And I say all that to say is that growing up, I had this education, public school education in Brookline, Massachusetts was actually one of the best in the country. We spent more money per kid than almost any school system in the nation. but we were still a public school. And so I remember always, growing up, we had everything, back when computers became, popular and, you could have.
Y'all had the Macs?
We had the Macs, the LC2 or whatever it was called. We had the Mac. We were on that Mavis Beacon or whatever that was. We had all the supplies. And so I just remember growing up, being told I had a really good education. Now, I say all that, moving forward, when I graduated from Brookline Public High School and then came down to Atlanta and went to Morehouse College, it was almost immediate, the knowledge or the understanding that I actually didn't know anything. I didn't know anything about myself as a Black man. I didn't know anything about my history, about my culture, other than what my parents had taught me in the house. The education system that I grew up in was not affording me, education about who I was. It was giving me a very Eurocentric education. And so I'm at Morehouse, and these brothers are talking about all these different authors and having read all these different people and knew all this different history. And they were talking about civilizations in Africa. And I had never heard any of that stuff. Wow. I didn't know anything. All I knew was what everybody else knows that happens in February. You got Rosa Parks, she sat down. You got Martin Luther King, he helped everybody stand up. And then at some point in time, Malcolm X was in there causing some ruckus. That's all I knew, right? And so I was like, well, hold on now. If I'm getting the best education, the best public school education possible in this country, and I don't know anything about who I am as a Black man, what does that say, or what's happening in communities that do not have the best funding? What's happening to people who look like me, who don't come from the best neighborhoods, who don't have, all these extra resources? Like, what kind of education are they getting? Because I have all the money and all the stuff being thrown at me, and I don't know anything. And so I'm like, they must know. Are they getting? If I don't know anything, they must be getting less than what I'm getting. So like, what's happening? And so I was like, there's something wrong with that. There's something wrong with the way this education system is set up in terms of teaching African American people about who they are and where they come from. And so when I went into Morehouse College, I was a business major. I was going to go out and do business, do sports management, make a lot of money. And then that changed because I found a purpose that was deeper than that and bigger than money. And that was, a dedication to my people and correcting that wrong that this education system has perpetuated for such a long time. So I changed my major, history major. I dove into African history, dove into Black history, read every book I could. Didn't speak in any of my classes for like 3 years because I was so embarrassed that I didn't know anything. Every time somebody called out a title or an author, I wrote it down. And then I went back to my dorm room and I read the book or found out more about it. And then so I graduated Morehouse College with the intent of becoming a teacher. I joined Teach for America in 2002, went down to Houston, Texas. Loved, it was like, I don't know if you know anything about Teach for America. It's like 5 weeks of intense training, that really does, they do the best they can with what they got, but there's nothing that's going to prepare you in 5 weeks for stepping into a classroom and having never taught before. So, and
then you got thrown into what kind of school?
A Title I school for sure. Title I school for sure.
I know Teach for America.
Yeah. I was definitely, in the community. And I was teaching 6th grade social studies. I started out teaching kindergarten. So I taught like the itty bitty babies for like a hot second. And then I taught 6th grade social studies, loved that, and realized this is what I want to do with the rest of my life. I wanted to be an educator. I wanted to teach children. So I taught there for 3 years, but realized that the community of children I wanted to serve was in Atlanta, was where I, kind of got this and gained this knowledge. And I wanted to be around as many Black children as humanly possible. So I came back to Atlanta, joined a charter school network here in Atlanta, and have been teaching here ever since 2005. And slowly developing a curriculum that's African-centered, that's culturally relevant and responsive to the kids I teach. And, and I think that part in me has grown and grown and grown, which is kind of what brought me to write the book. And then somewhere in there, I became an assistant principal of a high school, and I did that for some time. I was instructional coach, coaching teachers, on educational practices. And then I developed my own consulting company called Project Ujima, where I train teachers in schools about how to, teach Black children effectively. And then here we are talking to you, on American Legacy.
Thank you for that journey.
Yeah, sorry, I told you it was a big question.
No, we needed that. We need context.
Yeah. Sure.
But don't think I'm not going to go back because I got questions. All right.
Let's do it.
So first, who influenced you to go to Morehouse? That's the first one. There's another one coming.
Sure. Well, Morehouse was the only school I applied to, and I applied early. All right. My brother went to Morehouse. My older brother went to Morehouse. Three of my older cousins went to Morehouse. And my older sister went to Spelman, and subsequently my younger sister went to Spelman. So like the whole Morehouse Spelman, vibe definitely runs deep.
So you were groomed. Well, I mean, HBCU proud.
I got to go stay with my brother down at Morehouse in 1988. I was 8 years old. And this is a real thing. And for those who know, I got to experience the very first Freaknik. And it was in a park. It was a barbecue. So that's what people don't know. What people know about Freaknik is what 1994, 95, 96. I was there in 1988 when it was just a barbecue at somebody's park, right? And so I kind of just was like, oh, this is where I need to be. It was beautiful Black people. Everybody was so friendly. I got to sit in a couple of classes, and I was sold. I was sold.
Awesome. We got family ties in Spelman. Shout out to my sister cousin Kia. Spelman, come through.
That's right.
But you said as you were sitting in these classes, you kept hearing these books. What were some of the books that were life-changing for you that you decided to indulge in when you were learning all these things?
Good question. The most seminal book for me was the autobiography of Malcolm X. I've read that book more times than I've read any other piece of literature anywhere. So I read that when I was 11, and that planted a seed in me, and then I read it again later on. But from there, in Morehouse, anything Sheikh Anta Diop, book Civilization or Barbarism or African Origins of Civilization, those two books stand out in college. Miseducation of the Negro, Carter G. Woodson, stood out for me in college. Anything by Ivan Van Sertima, I think they came before Columbus, I think was the title there. There were a bunch, but I just remember just anytime somebody said something, Chancellor Williams, and a couple of others, Destruction of the Black Civilization. These are all books that brothers, were familiar with, and I didn't know anything about. And then reading those books, I just, the doors and the windows in my mind became open. I was like, oh, we have a long history, a deep history. It's being kept from us. And I remember being angry about that. Like, why? Like, I don't understand. But as I read more, I understood why.
So let's talk about that. Once you did find yourself in the classroom and you're teaching these students, what were you noticing about what was being left out, how comfortable the administration or whoever was at the top was with you putting it in, and then how the students received it?
Sure. Well, I think the first thing I noticed was that even in Houston and in Atlanta is that the state standards don't give a balanced view of what history should look like. History should include all people. It should include the contributions and the accomplishments of all people. But it definitely doesn't do that. It definitely tells the narrative that this country was founded, grown, and sustained by white people, and specifically white men. And that is one of the furthest things from the truth, if you really want to get into the actual history of it. And so that's one of the first things I noticed is that I'm looking and having read and knowing about history, and I'm reading these standards. I was like, well, they're leaving so many things out. There are a lot of these gaps, like they're jumping from thing to thing, and they're not giving any historical context. So the first thing I did is that anytime I saw a standard about anything having to do with history, I would then add in all the gaps. And so I kind of created my own curriculum within the curriculum that the state was providing. And I did that, right out the gate, because that's what I got into education to do. And one of the first things that happened was I had white teachers who were teaching either on my hallway or in the building with me, hearing about this stuff and saying, he's teaching white hate. He's teaching the kids to hate white people, right? And so I had to have meetings and stuff like that. And they're like, what's going on? I was like, first of all, you can come into my classroom anytime you want. I'm not hiding anything. But all I'm teaching is the truth, right? And secondly, I'm not teaching anyone to hate anyone. What I am doing is teaching kids who look like me to love themselves. And one does not equate the other. And I had to explain that to a teacher. It's like, just because the kids you teach who are Black children love themselves does not mean that they're going to hate you. But what you're dealing with is guilt. You're dealing with guilt because you know what the history is about to say. You know what this story is about to, how it's about to unfold. You know what your ancestors did. And it would not be unfair for people to hate a group of people who did that. Now, I'm not saying that they should, but you have, like, you're privileged to be able to say that somebody shouldn't hate somebody who, enslaved, 100 million people. That by itself is your privilege, because you can't see it from my perspective. You can't think about, the millions of people who were raped, the millions of people who were brutalized and murdered. Like, that's not your context. And so you can't understand why somebody would feel strongly about that. So that's one of the first things that happened, is that I got some pushback. But what sealed all that up was that I was able to teach all the standards that the state wanted me to teach, and teach the things that I was bringing in. And so when it came time for the end of the year, state tests, my kids were passing at 100%. And so, bottom line, that's what most administrators care about. What are our numbers looking like? How do we look, in terms of the state? And the kids were passing. And so they're like, all right, well, then keep doing what you're doing.
Right. Well, let's talk about that, because I remember hearing you speak before, and you talked about, people's guilt that they deal with because of slavery. Sure. But you also talk about how you didn't start with slavery and what that does psychologically to the mind of a Black child. So I want you to talk about why that's important and how education and psychology go together, as far as thinking about reflections of who we are and what we represent and where we come from.
I mean, absolutely. I think what most textbooks do and what most state standards do is that when they talk about Black history, they start in slavery. And so if you start the history of a people in degradation, if you start the history of a people in violence and hardship and sorrow, then what kind of starting point is that for a group of people? How do they aspire to be anything if where they're coming from is this painful narrative? And so you end up feeling a certain way about yourself. Like, why would I want to be a part of this group of people who were owned by somebody else? Like, and so you stop there. And then there's another piece to that, is that there's this disjointed narrative in the back of your mind about what Africa is. And the two things are not always, put together. Like, you have slavery, and then you have another education somewhere in your mind about what Africa is. And so you have this notion in your mind that Africa is, jungles, that Africa is wild animals, that Africa is diseases, that Africa is, all of these terrible things. And then you fast forward, and now you got people who were taken from Africa and they're made to be enslaved. Why would you want to be a part of that? As a Black person, why would you want to be a part of that narrative? So what do? We start to look towards other people and aspire, to be like them, as opposed to being like who we are. And so we start to see, issues with identity, issues with pride, issues with self-concept and self-love, not loving our hair, not loving our skin color, not loving our lips, not loving our noses, because we start to associate all of those things with Africa and being Black, and, all the negative connotations that we've been taught. So what I do is I go way before slavery, and I start in Africa, and I start talking about the greatness of Africa. But before I do that, I have to actually break down the stereotypes that a lot of our kids have in their minds about what Africa actually is. And so I have to, deconstruct or unlearn what they've learned. And
how do you do that?
That's always
how does that conversation even start?
Yeah. Well, first,
and what are some of the things you hear from the kids before you introduce truth and the unknown?
Yeah, no, I think that's always the fun part, because you always have to assess what kids are walking in the door with. What do they already know? Paulo Freire, who wrote the amazing book, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, talks about, he goes against this idea of children being an empty vessel. like most people think that teachers are just here to give kids knowledge and fill them up as empty vessels. And he says that's not the case. Like if you're really trying to, create real learners, you have to understand that your kids come to the table with all sorts of knowledge and information. So the first thing I always do whenever I start any kind of unit is try to figure out what they already know, right? Whether, true, false, good, bad, whatever, just what do you already know? What do you think you know? And then from there, we do discovery. I'm not going to tell you what I think. I'm not going to tell you about, my feelings on this issue, that issue, or the other. What I am going to do is I'm going to present you with facts. I'm going to present you with images. I'm going to present you with primary sources. And so I always, what do you know about Africa? Okay, what do you think about when you think about Africa? I think it's hot. I think about lions. I think about jungles. I think about whatever it is that they think about. A lot of times they say, I think about the, those infomercials that come on like Sunday mornings with, for 17 cents a day and the price of coffee, you can save this kid. A lot of them think that over the years. That's kind of been a running theme. And so then I have to start breaking down, why that is. So I show them those pictures, and I show them side by side pictures of cities in Africa, because no one thinks that there are cities in Africa. I'm showing them African businesses. I'm showing them McDonald's in Africa. I'm showing them that Africa is a place just like this, but that the media and the powers that be have constructed this imagery that makes us think it's something different. So once I can change that, then that kind of opens up some doors and some windows in their minds to saying, okay, maybe what I think I know, I don't really know, right? And then we build from there.
That's one of the funny things we always talk about with Africa. Most people, the first time they went, they were one of the only Black people on the plane. And you look around and the plane is full. So for years and years, we've been told about how terrible it was, but everybody else is going.
That's right.
And so that's part of the unlearning.
Yeah.
Right.
Sure.
And when we start talking about self-esteem and why it matters, we get to think about, why is it that these are the images that we're being shown?
Sure.
So do kids ever ask questions about that? Like, is there ever an aha moment with them where they're like, wait a minute, the same way you sat in Morehouse and had those, light bulbs going off. What do the light bulbs look like for the kids?
All the time. It literally happens all the time. It looks like a whole bunch of things. It looks like 3 days ago, I had a child, a seventh grader, email me and say, hey, Mr. Edelin, can you send me a list of books that I can read? Because I want to learn more about our history. This is a 12-year-old, right? It could look like when we talk about what was done to our ancestors in terms of their robbing them of their African identity. I have had children say, you know what? Why am I keeping this last name then? This last name belonged to a slave owner, however many years ago. Why am I keeping this last name? And in my classroom, we have a naming ceremony where when we're studying about Africa and African culture, I give them a list of African names, male and female names, that have the meaning of those names next to them and where they're from in Africa. And the kids get to choose their own African name based on how they see themselves, based on what those words and those names mean. And I've had children only want to be called by their African name, right? Wow. Especially now that we're on Zoom, you can change your name on Zoom. I have kids who literally go and change their name on Zoom to their new African name.
And they say, my name is T'Challa.
Yeah, right. All of that. All of that. So it looks like it's a variety of things. It's a variety of things, and there's a spectrum of how kids react to knowledge of self. But it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing to see when it happens.
Well, I want to talk about starting from the very beginning, because in your book, you don't just start from just kings and queens. You go way back to the beginning of time and where humanity came from.
Right.
Why was that really important? That's something I don't think I learned until taking global. And even that was kind of like watered down and dabbled over. Yeah. So why go to the beginning of civilization?
Well, I think you have to know where this whole thing started from, like where we as a human race started from. And I wanted to make sure that I used, actual archaeological evidence to prove that, and as most scientists have done already, that human life, all life started in Africa. But what does that mean for us as African Americans, right? Like, what does it mean for us? Well, the narrative, what most people think is that, Black people have never done anything. We've never accomplished anything, especially African people have never accomplished anything. That's the mindset. I was like, what if kids could understand that there wouldn't even be a human race without Black people, without Africa? We spawned this whole thing. And yes, I understand the idea of race as a human construct. I completely get that. But we got to work within the context of what we have right now. We do have races, and we do have people placing labels on people. So let's try to sow some pride here while we still have these labels. People would not have been able to survive the harsh ultraviolet rays from the sun living around the equator, which is where human life started, without melanin, without the chemical in our skin that protects us from ultraviolet rays, and that's melanin. And so we develop melanin as a way to, as a natural defense mechanism to the environment. So that's where Black people come from. That's where this whole human race comes from. The original people on Earth were Black people. And then obviously, the conversation I always have in class is, well, where do white people come from? And so then we get to talk about what happens, when people migrate to different parts of the world and how the environment affects them, right? But the thing that they understand is that Black people, or rather African people, started this whole thing, and that B, having melanin is a good thing. Having melanin is positive. Melanin magic, right? All that kind of stuff, because there's also this feeling of, and we know about colorism, the idea that one skin tone is better than another skin tone. To have darker skin is not a beautiful thing. And a lot of my kids feel that way. I've had kids since I've been starting teaching up until a couple of days ago who have been told that they are not beautiful or not pretty or not attractive because they have dark skin. And so I'm trying to change that whole mindset and change the way they feel about that, because that shouldn't be. And and we can get into the conversation about where that comes from, because that definitely has its roots within this the whole slavery complex. But I get sad when I hear that, because that's not where we came from, and that's not who we are.
And how much power do we have as educators in being a part of that narrative or dispelling that narrative? And this is whether you're a Black educator or not, because,
exactly.
It is what it is. There are always going to be teachers who are not necessarily the same color of the students. But if they're stepping into this conversation right now, what are things that they can do?
Yeah, no, and 80% of educators in the United States are white women. And so, I mean, it's inevitable that you're going to have somebody who does not look like, the kids they teach. And that's okay. That's okay. What's not okay is when you continue the stereotypes and you perpetuate, the status quo and Eurocentrism, and how this country, this education system in this country debilitates Black people. So what can you do? You can learn. I mean, the thing about it is we all grew up in the same educational system, Black, white, or otherwise. We all have been missing this education. So what do? You got to educate yourself on things you don't know. All right, if you didn't take any African-American history courses in college or high school, because who did, right? Then go find some books, right? I mean, it's not like you can't find books. Google is a powerful thing, right? If you didn't take any Hispanic history courses in school, then go read. If you don't know anything about, LGBTQ rights and anything like that, then go read, right? I mean, we have to take it upon ourselves to educate ourselves, because no one else is going to do it. Because if they did, then this whole system would flip itself on its head.
So let's talk about that, educating ourselves. One of the things that we're noticing during COVID is that there's certain communities who are maybe not necessarily thriving because this is new, but their parents have other resources. They're getting extra help. What does that look like for a child from a Title I school? And those of you who don't know what Title I is, those are schools where a certain percentage of the students are receiving free lunch, which means that the assumption is that these are children who are from areas where there's a lot more poverty, right? That's where they bring in the teachers from Teach for America. That's where sometimes they get more programming for parent workshops. So when you are working with these students who are home, who may not have the same type of access, what are things that their parents can do at home, or the community can do to help uplift them and teach them more about their history? Because now, for those who are homeschooling, you don't have to be as traditional as we had to be before. So what does that look like?
I think you have a couple of lanes available. The first, like, and I think you hit the nail on the head. There are tons of homeschool networks that are doing some amazing work, educating kids, and who have been doing a great, amazing work just about making sure that our kids know who they are and where they come from. So tapping into that lane, I think, is going to be invaluable. But it's hard. I think it's hard because there's so much weight placed on the shoulders of parents who are working so hard to, put food on the table, roof over the head, lights on, and make sure that internet is popping. And that's the thing that we've been seeing, is that you have, now that everybody's home at the same time, you got 3 and 4 kids, or 2 and 3 kids, and a parent and another parent, all trying to use the same internet at the same time. And, we got lags, we got people getting kicked off the internet, it's all sorts of stuff. And it's just about resources. It's about resources and things we've never seen before. There are tons of programs available through different companies that are, enabling people to boost their internet and things of that nature. But if we're talking about just the knowledge of self and the history, I think you got to lean on your community. I think you said it again, like, you can't expect people who are already trying to do so much just to make things work, right, take on this new thing. So I think if we banded together as a community, if we said, you know what, hey, I'm having a hard time doing this stuff, but I know that my kid needs this, then we find people who are already doing it and latch onto that. There's no need to recreate the wheel.
Yeah, I got that. So what do you do when you just don't know? You said Google, research. Then we also have your book, right? Right? So tell me about what it was like putting it together, deciding what you wanted to include, maybe even getting feedback from people saying, well, you forgot this right here, maybe a second edition.
Yeah, that was the hard part. That was the hard part, trying to figure out what to put in this piece of work that was supposed to span from the beginning of time up and through the civil rights movement, but also not make it a textbook. I didn't want to make it super thick and imposing. So I had to kind of put it into chapters. I put it into sections and different epochs within our history. So there's ancient African history. Then there's the enslavement time period. Then there's, the early 20th century, where we get to talk about Du Bois and BTW and Marcus Garvey and, the Harlem Renaissance and things of that nature. And then we get into the civil rights movement. And so I had to be very strategic about that. Like, what are just some concrete things that kids should know about? But then B, what are some of those other things that aren't often taught that they should know about as well, so that they can move into their educational career having this educational armor, this knowledge of self that not everybody else gets to have. So there's stuff on the Black Panthers in there that's never really taught in schools. There's stuff on Ella Baker, who is single-handedly responsible for, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and the work they were doing with sit-ins and stuff like that. So making sure that, we include these heroes and sheroes that are not often in the narrative.
So what does your dream look like for education? If this is something are you familiar with Freedom Schools?
I am.
Okay. Is this something that you would want to implement in all schools? Is it something that your school uses now that they know that it's there and it's available?
Yeah. I think my dream would be that my book gets picked up as part of an established curriculum. That would be my dream and my hope, because you can actually, and for those who don't know, the book itself actually has lessons in it. It has reading comprehension questions in it. It has video links in it. It has, STEM connection questions in it. So there's all sorts of stuff you can do with the book. That would be my dream, because I think it approaches African-American history from a very palatable point of view. I'm not getting super deep. I wrote it on a 7th to 11th grade reading level, so that, it can be accessed by multiple age groups of kids. So that's what I would love. But then there's the curriculum, but then there's the knowledge of how to teach the curriculum. And those two things are different. I can put this in front of, a teacher and say, all right, go to work. But if they don't necessarily know how to teach children, specifically African-American children, then it's kind of moot. It's a moot point. So I think the curriculum would go well with some good training around culturally relevant teaching, culturally responsive pedagogy, critical consciousness pedagogy, that arms the kids with the knowledge and then has them take that knowledge and make change in their community. That would be my goal, is to not just have knowledge for knowledge's sake, but okay, what are you going to do with this knowledge? How are you going to take this knowledge and change your circumstance and circumstances of your people?
So that's important. Consciousness in the classroom, consciousness of bias, consciousness of what we're showing up with for the students. Can you talk about what that could look like? You know, you get the information, but you're not aware of what you're bringing in.
Yeah.
And then some of the things maybe you may have brought in at the beginning of your teaching career and shedded some of that to show up as a teacher and be more effective in the classroom.
Yeah. What it looks like, you know, a pie in the sky dream is it looks like students leading their own educational revolution. They're the ones saying, okay, hey, we just found out about this content. We just found out about this policy. What can we do to change it? We have knowledge of self now. We know that when we see certain things in the curriculum that it's wrong, and we know that we have the power to change it. So it looks like them writing textbook companies, right? Yeah. It looks like them, showing up at school board meetings, right, as the voice of the people, because they are the people. It looks like them going into high school and founding their own, Black student union clubs and advocating for their own culture, no matter where they go to high school, whether they go to a majority high school or, Title I high school or whatever you want to call it, wherever they go, they are advocating for change. And not just change for themselves and for Black people, but for all people, right? Like any oppressed people. And I think they have to, that's part of it too, is aligning or connecting the idea that oppression is a system. And if we can alleviate oppression, not just for us, but for all people, then we gain allies and things can start to change from a systemic, point of view. I think that's super important, is this idea of knowing that you are being oppressed by a larger system.
So think about the system at the moment, where we have, again, somebody high up saying, I want to rewrite history because it doesn't make my people look good.
Right.
How would you encourage students to rise up against that, as far as having pride, speaking up against oppression while still doing it in the classroom? I don't know if you watch This Is Us. That's one of my shows. Yeah. But there was a conversation I had with my girlfriend Estelita, and we talked about the young lady doing a video. She's like, I think in junior high school or maybe high school. She just got to high school. And she's like shouting, profanities about her teacher who touched her hair. And her parents put her on punishment. And the dad said, listen, I'm really glad you're speaking up. You know what I mean? You need to be speaking up, but there's a certain way to do it. And as we've seen over the last few months, there are so many different ways to do it. Some people think certain ways are wrong, some people don't. But as a student, when you face something like this in the classroom and you want to speak up, what are some constructive ways to do it where you might be effective, but you are also getting your point across and letting it be known?
Yeah, also, the first thing I think is exposure, right? We have to expose our children to different means of protest. And when I say exposure, I'm talking about historical exposure. Okay, so what does peaceful protest look like? What does boycotting look like? And a lot of people think those, put those two things hand in hand, but boycotting is very specific. What does civil disobedience look like? What does revolution look like? Right? And giving them historical context and giving them some historical, examples of that, and then say, okay, because this is where the critical consciousness comes in the classroom. Okay, here's our situation. This is what's happening to us right now as a people. Call it what you want. This police brutality. We can talk poverty. We can talk, drugs. We can talk, unequal criminal justice. All of that kind of stuff. Okay, so what do we need to do to change our situation? Which one of those tactics we've talked about is going to help us, right? And so you get the kids to start forming their own opinion. Again, I don't want to be this guy who's pouring this information. They need to be able to figure out their own destiny. They need to figure out what their own revolution is going to look like for themselves. And it's not all going to be the same. They're not going to come to a consensus. but to get them thinking about it, to get them talking about it is important. What a 12-year-old does as protest and what an 18-year-old does as protest is two different things, right? What a 7-year-old can do and what a 15-year-old can do are two different things. And so I think that's part of it too, is when you're talking to kids, letting them know what avenues are available to them. You know, cursing out a teacher might not be the move because,
right.
because you got consequences that come with that because you are not in power, but you do have a voice, and how do you use that voice? All right. How do you talk to your parents about what's going on in the classroom and letting them know how you felt about when the teacher touched your hair, or how you felt about the idea that, teacher, grazed over African history, but drove right into slavery. Right. And so allowing the kids to come up with their own tactics. And then see how we can put it into place. I've done that tons of times in the classroom where I say, okay, cool. Let's do this thing then. If you feel so strongly about uniforms right now, because it takes away your individuality, and because this is always the thing, it's always uniform. Mm-hmm. All right, well, what are we gonna do then? Right. And so then I just have them, brainstorm ideas with me and shoot ideas at me. And then I play the devil's advocate and I play administration and say, okay, well, this is what's going to happen if you go down this route or down this road. And are you going to accept the consequences for what you believe in? Right? Because that's also part of revolution too, and protest is sacrifice. And we also teach that through historical example. Look what happened to King. Look what happened to Malcolm. Look what happened to all these people. Look at all the, the sit-ins who were being nonviolent, doing their thing, and look at what's happening. So you have to tell both sides of that narrative. Is, there's the protest, there's the action, but what's the reaction going to be?
The consequence, yeah.
But it has to come from them. I can't just tell them how to secure their own freedom. It has to come from them.
So what advice would you give to parents if they see their children are like little activists and they want to get involved, but the parent is kind of like, whoa, I'm not quite sure what's going on with that. Mm-hmm. What resources, what are some fun, could be fun or not, but projects they can do at home to help their children have a stronger voice? Yeah. And connect with whatever their heart is telling them about their culture and what they feel about what's happening in the times.
Absolutely. The first thing I always tell parents, because I get that question a lot, first thing I always tell parents is you need to do what you feel comfortable about in your house, right? Don't do what, the kid comes home and say, well, so-and-so mama has let me go out to the protest downtown, the Black Lives Matter protest downtown. You might not,
nope. That might be a no for you.
Yeah,
right.
A bit much.
So or not,
Right. You need to do what you feel comfortable with, in your household, raising your child. That's on you. What I will say is that if your child finds an interest in something, you should nourish that. You shouldn't, just like if your child comes home and say, hey, I want to play soccer, you nourish that, right? You support that. But you have to figure out how you do that. So if your child comes home and say, hey, I want to change my name, or hey, I want to, I want to participate in a protest, how can you do that in a way that's comfortable for you in your household? But you don't shut it down, because then what does that do to that child futuristically in terms of, how they feel about themselves and what they feel like their role can be in changing whatever system this is, if it was shut down at such an early age.
Thank you. And, I guess there's another piece to that. If you see that your child is feeling some kind of way about school and they've spoken up, how do you advocate for your child to the school in a way that is also productive? Parents are watching Zoom right now, sure. And some of them are seeing things they're not totally pleased with. Yeah. So as a parent, what are things that you can do to advocate for your child?
I think parents have the most power, I think, in the school system, period. And I think that they oftentimes don't necessarily know or understand how much power they do have. And I think it often comes around this notion that the teacher or the administrator, they are the professionals. They're the ones who went to school for this stuff. They know what they're talking about. I don't want to go against that because they, they're the experts. But really, the parents are the experts on their own kids. And if you see something that you don't like, your child. You know how your child's going to react. You know how it's going to affect your child. And so if you as a parent feel a certain kind of way, do not, and I believe me, as a teacher, even when it comes at me from parents, I love when parents advocate for their kids, because it shows a level of concern. It shows a level of love. It shows a level of involvement that honestly, a lot of people think that Black people, especially in, quote unquote Title I schools or underserved schools, don't have. Most people think that the parents aren't involved. They're just doing whatever. But what I've seen is that these parents, our parents, my parents, love their kids. They want the best for their kids, like any parent would. And, they want to do whatever they can. But the problem is, oftentimes they don't know what to do. They don't know what to do. And so they just, they go with whatever the educator says or whatever the administrator says because they feel like they're the expert. But if you feel like something's wrong, if you get that little ping in the back of your head, like, I don't like that, speak up. Speak up. Absolutely.
Yeah, so I will be taking questions soon, guys. If you have questions, you can start sending them in. But Joseph, I work in the New York City area with students very often. And it's a very mixed population, a lot of Latin culture, a lot of Afro-Latin culture. And, once there are certain things being introduced about Black history and African history, the same as you said, there are a lot of stereotypes that go with that. So I've had many students come into the classroom looking just like me, who have absolutely no acknowledgement of any lineage in Africa, their ancestry, and feel absolutely no connection. Why is African-American history, Black history important for everyone, even if you are not of African ancestry, or maybe you are and just haven't yet grown to acknowledge it?
I think that, first of all, knowing everybody's history is important. And I think, the reason why there's so much strife between different groups of people is because we have stereotypes in our mind about who each other are. White people think this way about Black people think this way about white people, Asian people think this way about Black people. It's this crazy web, but it all comes from lack of understanding. And so if we can start teaching about everybody's history in school, honestly, then I think we will all understand each other a little bit better, understand who we are, understand where everybody comes from, and that can dispel a lot of these myths and stereotypes. So that's A. But specifically with African-American history and also connected with that African history has been so miseducated that it has created this notion in a lot of people's heads that Black people are a certain way or African people are a certain way when we are not. And so if we can start incorporating a deep dive of African-American history into the curriculum, that can help, and no matter what school you're at, that can help change and educate people on the truth about it. Because a lot of people have been miseducated. They think one thing about Black history, but in actuality, the truth is a lot different.
Thank you. So I have your book in front of me. Those of you who might be watching, you can drop this, Josh, if you like, for anybody who's watching. So it's called Through Our Own Eyes, A Journey into African-American History. And there's history. It's a curriculum guide for teachers and parents. There's also like questions. So like at the end of reading different excerpts, there are questions, to see if there's an understanding. And then there's a part called Take It to the Next Level. So after learning about the era of the Reconstruction, one of the Take It to the Next levels is research a particular HBCU that you're interested in and create a PowerPoint presentation that describes that school. Why was that something that you chose as like a Take It to the Next level? Like, how did you decide the types of projects that could add to these lessons?
Well, I wanted to personalize it. I wanted to take the information because, again, that's what a lot of textbooks do is that, you get the text and then you answer the questions and okay, move on to the next chapter. But what I wanted to do within the book is I wanted to create activities that, created a depth of knowledge, that created a depth of understanding by doing things, by having the kids actually do stuff with the information. So if you're talking about Reconstruction, you're talking about the Freedmen's Bureau. And many HBCUs came out of the work that the Freedmen's Bureau did, which is educating, newly freed individuals from slavery. And so if we're going to be talking about that, let's talk about HBCUs. All right. So what do you know about HBCUs? Maybe your aunt went to Fisk, or maybe your dad went to Morehouse, or whatever, or somebody, or maybe you don't know anything. This would be a great time for you to research that. Great time for you to learn a little bit more about a school that you might be able to want to go to one day. But it connects it to the history piece. All right, where did these things come from? Why were they established? All right, now let's go find out about Hampton. Let's go find out about Spelman. Let's go find out about FAMU. Let's go find out about Howard.
FAMU, woo woo.
Right? And then once you research that, and then you create a PowerPoint or a Google slideshow or whatever you want to call it. Now you're taking the information, you're doing something with it, and you're finding out about it for yourself. And maybe that sparks an interest in that child that want to go to that school one day because they saw a video of FAMU's band, right? Or they saw
Marching 100.
you already know, or they saw the fact that Martin Luther King went to Morehouse, right? Or they saw Howard's campus, and they're like, oh, I want to go there, right? And it's just, again, exposure. You don't know what you don't know until you figure it out.
You got it. So you just talked about Martin Luther King. I see one of the other exercises is making a comic book describing something that happened with Martin Luther King. So this, you said 7th to 12th grade, but I'm wondering if this is something that a family can use even for children who are younger. And if they are, how you would tell those lessons in a way that might be more age appropriate, or even some projects that might go with the what they're learning about for a younger age group.
Sure.
Like, what are projects that a parent might want to check in with and
Absolutely.
add to their lessons?
Absolutely. So the reading, the grades that I kind of built this for was pretty much anything from 5th to about seniors in high school. And you could do a lot of the different activities depending on where your child is at. One of the things that I wanted to make sure I did within this book is that I wanted to include multimedia. So even if your child is not reading on the level that the text is written on, I've included within each text a QR code that you can scan with your phone, and a video will come up on about that topic that you're reading. So even if they can't read the text or understand the text, here comes a video that will show them in a visual way, right? Because a lot of our kids are visual learners. So you can start there just by showing the videos. Even if they're not getting into the text, you can show the videos and then do some of the projects based on the videos. The easiest thing to do is to just do the reading for understanding. Is your child understanding the reading? Go with those questions that are after every reading. And then you can go through and look at the activities, and you can actually literally pick one. You can, because there are 3 activities that go with each reading. And you can do all of them, or you can do some of them, or you can do none of them and then jump to the STEM questions at the end, because I want to make sure I connected math and science in there as well, because that's part of our history as well. That's what I would do. I think this is the beautiful thing about this book, is that it is customizable to whatever you want to do with it. If you want to start at civil rights and work backwards, do that. If you want to just focus on the earliest 20th century, then do that. You don't have to go in any order, but it does move in a chronological order if you wanted to do that.
Thank you. We have a question from Lynn Tier Peterson. Thank you. The current climate has created space for educators, students, and community advocacy to be heard regarding teaching students, specifically Black and Brown students, about themselves. How would you advise local and state officials to begin reviewing and revising social studies standards?
Great question. Fantastic question. The first thing I would do is make sure that the people who are reviewing those standards, A, know history and know the full story, but B, make sure that the people reviewing it are reflective of the history you're trying to teach, right? If you have, again, like I said, this, most of the people in education, most teachers are white women. If the room, reviewing these standards is a bunch of white women and they don't know about the history, then inevitably that story could easily be Eurocentric in how they review the standards. So let's make sure that we get a little bit more of a diverse crowd who's actually reviewing those standards. So that's, I think, the first thing, is making sure that people coming to the table are not just one monolithic group of people.
Right.
Secondly, you got to bring in experts. Like, okay, sure. So you're going to review U.S. history standards, right? Let's make sure that you bring in experts who know U.S. history and can actually bring in the different perspectives and different people within the standards. And though it's not just, necessarily people who've been teaching. Like, I've been teaching for a long time, but there are parts of history that I know I'm not an expert on.
Yeah.
And so making sure the people who are doing it are experts. There are tons of curriculum out there, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. That's another thing, is that people think you have to just start writing curriculum from scratch. You don't have to do that. I've written a curriculum for here in Atlanta, but there are curriculum that are being used in Chicago. And there are things out there that you can use. And so not trying to reinvent the wheel and thinking that that's such a huge task that you don't even want to tackle it, when there's actually some resources out there for you.
Right. So there's help, there are resources.
Absolutely.
And lastly, we're about to get off in a couple of minutes. Tell people where they can find your book. The holidays are approaching. So if you are looking to get something for a young person that's going to enhance their knowledge, increase their pride based on what we learned today, we know it's not just history. It's a lot deeper than that. Tell us where we can find it and why it is important.
Absolutely. Well, first, you can find it in one of two places. You can go directly to Amazon and you can type in the title Through Our Own Eyes, and it should come up. But I also have a website. It's www.project-ujima.com. And there you can order it from there. And you can also see some of the other services I offer in terms of training and workshops for teachers and schools. But the reason why it's important is because, there's a brother, if you're in New York, you know anything about New York, the Schomburg Center. And Schomburg Center for African American History and Culture, the brother who is named after, Arthur Schomburg, he was an Afro-Puerto Rican, and he said that the missing pages of world history is African history. And so if we are trying to educate ourselves about the world and know about each other as, global citizens and kind of get rid of these labels of race and all that and just know each other as human beings, then we need to know the story of each one of us as human beings. And so I think that's important. We need to know about African American history just like we need to know about everybody else's history, because it's the history of us as a global people.
As a humanity. Question, someone wanted to know, would you prefer people buy it off of Amazon or Ujima?
It doesn't matter. They both come from the same place.
Okay.
Yeah, Amazon is fine. Yeah. Unless you're buying in bulk and then you can see me directly.
So there you go. If you want to buy in bulk, if you're an educator, if you want this for your classroom, I'm just going to hold it up one more time because it's not, just a book. If you look inside of it, at the end of all the chapters, you got worksheets. If you want to go there, just buy a bunch of them. But if you can't, go ahead and copy the pages if that's what works best for you.
Let me jump in. For those who do want to buy in bulk for their school, because that's definitely what I would recommend. You can contact me through my website, and we can work that out there. I can definitely get you a good amount of copies if you don't want to just buy a whole bunch from Amazon, and I can definitely do that for you.
All right, so you guys heard it here at American Legacy. Thank you, Joseph, for joining us, sharing all of that knowledge. Thank you, everyone, for watching. If you have any other questions, you can go on Ujima, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Project Ujima.
Project Ujima. Mm-hmm. And ask. This is American Legacy. This is what it's about, learning about our history, learning about our culture, and knowing that we are so important in this world. The world does not go unless we're here, right? The beginning of civilization is important and it matters. Go on American Legacy Network, download. Just a reminder, you want to watch programs, you want to watch people cook. They got some really good recipes on there, guys. Black programming from, I'm going to say back in the day, but like the 60s and stuff. There's programming for that too. So go on, download, share with your friends. It's only $3.99 a month. And again, I am Crystyn Wright Diaz, owner of the HodgepodgeKids.com. Anybody who's looking to be part of community right now, we talked a little bit about that, but some of us are home, some of us are stuck at home. We want to be with family, we want to be with friends. We got yoga, we got dance. Shout out to my mom tonight who is all set up to do Golden Fitness. If you know any seniors who want to work out and stay healthy and can't go to the gym, HodgepodgeKids.com. That's Crystyn Wright Diaz. And you are here with the right stuff. So until next time, keep learning, keep growing. Thank you so much for joining us. All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you for having me.